We're coming to a close when it comes to Power Zone, with just 26 minutes before we hit 3 a.m. Dr. Jane Samuga now joins us on the line, medical practitioner and founder of Ask Dr. Jane. We are undressing Andropause. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Doctor, and a warm welcome to Power Zone.
Good morning. Good morning, Vicky. Thank you so much for the invitation and the welcome. Absolutely a pleasure being here this morning.
Let's start off by defining what andropause is, because most people associate it with male menopause as well.
That's actually quite a good question, Pretty. Andropause is essentially, the easiest way to understand it is to call it male menopause. It is a normal sexual aging process that affects most men. The primary driver of it is a decline in testosterone. So the best way to understand andropause is to consider it sort of like the opposite of puberty. So puberty is that on button which men and women, boys and girls go through when their sexual function is switched on. So it's very obvious. You can see it in young boys with the development of hair on the face, on the chest, in the underarms, on the pubic area, with changes in the voice, like, this deep, heavy, strong voice, with skin changes. You can see acne, with muscle development, like boys suddenly they shoot up in height. They get these big, strong muscles. And there are even emotional side effects to puberty. One of the big ones we see is that confidence surge, suddenly, feeling cool, feeling strong. It's also a surge of strength. So andropause is similar to menopause, but it's also very different. So it is essentially the male menopause, where you see a decrease in testosterone in a sexually functioning male.
You mentioned that it's age-related. And when we speak about age, maybe give us a bracket of this age as to when one might start noticing the signs and symptoms of andropause, and also just mention some of the signs and symptoms that one should look out for at that particular age.
So the peak of sexual health on average for a male is in the early 20s, and they're 18 years old. So essentially, teenage boys are walking around with the highest level of testosterone, the highest it's ever going to be. That's why teenage boys are so dangerous. It actually starts to decrease from there. It starts in about the 30s to decrease. But at that point, it's not noticeable as a problem. What men notice more is what we call a maturing. So they sort of become calmer, they become more reasonable and less driven by sex. There's less this heavy, heavy sex drive. The symptoms become noticeable as a problem sort of from the 40s. So this is what men usually start to notice first, but it's not necessarily the only symptom. So number one, and big primarily, is erectile dysfunction. So the strength of erection, the force of ejaculation, the frequency with which they desire sex, the frequency with which they think about sex, that's usually the big one that men will start to notice. But there are other things as well, and these are symptoms that are also similar to menopause, but are also different. So a big one is a loss of muscle bulk. So men in their 40s, 50s will start to notice that even if they're working out, going to the gym in the same way that they used to, the muscle is just not the same, or it just doesn't respond. So they might even start losing weight. They start putting on fat that they cannot shake off. They might even start getting a bit of a flabby chest. Some even get full-on breasts. Night sweats is a big one. Insomnia, struggling to sleep, is a big one. It really, really affects mood as well, and confidence. So this is what we term, almost jokingly, the midlife crisis. It's almost like the man wakes up and realizes, oh my goodness, What have I done with my life? Where am I going with my life? Did I do everything I was supposed to do? Did I have all the children that I was supposed to have? Almost like a second wind. This is where people start with their second marriages, with their affairs. They start buying these big cars. It's a largely hormonal driven thing. And men usually start to notice it in their 40s, in their 50s, and the driver is when they notice a difference in their sex drive. But that's just one of the few symptoms. Even depression is quite a big one. Sudden, unexplained depression at that age is a big indicator of sexual aging.
You've given us an indication of age being one of the main things to look out for. What would you align together with the age as the root cause of andropause? Is it more of a natural production?
That's actually a very good question, Pretty. It's normal. That's what it is. It's a normal process of sexual aging. So you see, if I can use the example of puberty, there's an on button that teenagers and prepubescents go through, where the sexuality is sort of switched on. They become aware of sexuality, they become aware of sex, and they start to have these drivers towards reproduction. The big difference between men and women is that women have an off button. So at some point in their 50s, and most women can attest, they can identify almost exactly when it happened. The button goes off. So the sexual desire, there's nothing. They might notice a decrease in the size of their breasts. They might notice the skin starting to sag, but they can pinpoint it almost exactly in time. Now, men, they almost never have that off button. So that's why men can still reproduce no matter how old they are, in their 80s and their 90s. They're still very capable of producing sperm. So you see it starting from about 40, where the testosterone starts to decrease. But it never actually gets to a point where it switches off. So the man might notice a decrease in sex drive, a decrease in the size of the sex organ, the penis, the testes, they get smaller. There's hair that starts to grow in different places, and some hair is even lost in others. Men tend to get bald. They get that hairy nose, those hairy ears, those hairy fingers. The average that we see it, that men start to notice and to complain about it, is from around the 40s. So you have someone who goes from an 18-year-old who has these uncontrollable, unpredictable, constant erections to someone who might even start struggling, even when they're in moments of desiring sexual intimacy. Now, the thing with a low libido is that the problem, the concern is very subjective. So some people are more concerned a bit early than others. Some people just consider it a normal part of aging. It is essentially for everyone a normal part of aging and not necessarily a disease process. But when it starts to interfere with quality of life, and now remember I said, this can cause serious depression, midlife crisis, where people keep making very interesting decisions. Suddenly, their wife of 30 years is not looking that attractive anymore, and they're looking at somebody who's 30 years old, wanting to start relationships with that person. That is when it starts to become a problem. You'll also notice something interesting, like older couples tend to have slightly more spicy fights. It's because they're both moody, so it can cause heavy mood swings and irritability. Those are some of the symptoms our men in their 40s, 50s, and 60s should be looking out for.
The process of diagnosis?
It is twofold. So number one is a blood test. So a blood test that your doctor can do for you will be able to tell us if you have a low testosterone. But Andropause is also a process of decreasing testosterone. So even if you get tested, if you find that you have some of these symptoms that I'm talking about, you will find that you have a normal testosterone, but the trend is that it's on the way down, it's on the decline. It may not yet have hit the floor to the point where, medically there's a need for treatment, but there's a second group of people who start to notice the symptoms even before the values on the blood test become abnormal. So two ways that we diagnose. We say number one, based on a blood test, and number two, based on your symptoms. So if these are symptoms that any of our gentlemen out there find themselves having, you might actually be going through andropause.
Can andropause affect fertility?
Absolutely, definitely. So it never gets to the point where men cannot reproduce entirely. So you'll remember, even in their 90s, even a man who's 100 years old, as long as he is still alive, they will continue to produce sperm. What changes, though, is their ability to produce good quality, good volume sperm, and even the impact on that sex drive can affect the ability to reproduce, even though there might be nothing physically wrong. So they'll still be producing sperm, but maybe less in number, less in volume, and because there's a lower drive for sex, it affects the ability to reproduce. It doesn't usually cause a full-blown infertility. So if somebody has infertility, the primary cause there would not be andropause. That would be something else that we're looking at. So infertility would usually affect somebody even when they're young, when the testosterone levels should actually be quite normal and on the higher side. So infertility doesn't really fall into the, is this andropause? If there is infertility, it might actually be linked to something else. So andropause is very easily treatable, for example, with testosterone replacement. You can have pills, you can have injections, you can have patches that you put on your skin, creams that you rub on your skin that can boost your testosterone. But infertility would not work with testosterone replacement. If anything, testosterone replacement can make infertility worse. It essentially tells your body that it doesn't need to produce testosterone. And that's what the body would use to make sperm, to make sure the sperm can swim well, to make sure erections are effective, to make sure the sex drive is going. So a bit of a different thing, infertility and testosterone. And those are one of the common myths as well surrounding andropause, is that it can lead into infertility. So in women, normal sexual aging eventually causes infertility. So at some point, women cannot have children anymore, but not so with men. They can keep going forever. They will never have infertility. But other than the sex drive, they can have a low height, become overweight, get, some boobs, the midlife crisis that we were talking about. And another thing is that it doesn't really happen to everyone in exactly the same way. So just like people might go through puberty a bit earlier or a bit later, some people go through andropause a bit earlier or a bit later, or sometimes even never. But definitely every single woman eventually gets to the point in menopause where the button goes off.
Let's speak about duration. How long does andropause last?
Andropause is essentially never ending. That is the problem. If it was the kind of thing where there's a spike in the change in the hormones, that's actually what happens with women. With women, it's like one day they wake up and the estrogen just takes a deep dive. It just tanks and goes into the floor, almost very close to zero. But with men, it's more gradual. So sort of stepwise, coming down, coming down, coming down, coming down, coming lower. Usually, as long as the man is alive, it doesn't come to an end. But what happens is they become very used to the decrease, and it sort of becomes a mental adjustment that they cope with. So what we usually recommend is if the symptoms start to become really bothersome. So if someone gets this heavy depression, this low self-esteem, this lack of confidence, and they're just, struggling to sleep, struggling with muscle bulk, struggling with sex drive, we don't really expect it to get any better. Because it's a normal process of aging, it would be like asking, when do the gray hairs turn back to black? They don't. They stay gray. They stay gray. This is normal and there's nothing wrong. But if your gray hair bothers you, then grab a box of dye and fix it. So if the symptoms of andropause bother you, don't expect it to get better unless you do something. There aren't really a lot of herbs that are known to help with andropause, but there are a lot of theories and a lot of words on the streets, but not really a lot of herbs. Really good medication that can help though. And some of the things that help protect men are like exercising, for example. So if somebody has a good muscle bulk to begin with, when they start to lose the muscle, they have sort of like a deposit. They have some space to lose muscle. So they don't become that completely flabby. They remain with a bit of tone. They remain with a bit of strength, and they don't get as many aches and pains and back problems and knee problems and that flabby sort of saggy skin.
The fact that you mentioned that, it just really lit up my light bulb, saying no wonder men are at the gym 3 times a day. If they're not joining running clubs and taking parts in comrade marathons, I think now it makes sense. Now it really gives us a glimpse of what exactly is happening physically as well as mentally to them. Look, you spoke about some of the signs and symptoms of looking out for when it comes to andropause. I think once somebody decides to neglect some of these signs and symptoms, we can easily then refer to this as untreated andropause. What are some of the potential risks that are associated with untreated andropause?
Oh, that's a good question. A lot of men they've never heard the word andropause. Let me actually ask you, Pretty, before our talk today, had you heard of the word andropause before?
No. Kudos to the producer, Hendrika.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
This is something that affects more than 50% of men in every population across the world. And it's something that they've never heard of. So you see, the side effects are sort of hidden. And they start to imagine that they have different problems to what they actually have. So they'll start to say, oh my goodness, my relationships are really starting to suffer. So the relationship with the wife changes, the relationship at work changes, even the physical confidence, the self-awareness changes. The voice might get a little bit lighter. The footsteps get a little bit lighter. Depression is one of the big underestimated symptoms of andropause in older age. So women also go through depression when they have menopausal symptoms. The difference is women have a whole group of ladies who they can complain with. They're like, oh, I'm getting night sweats, I'm getting hot flashes, and these are common symptoms. So as soon as I say those, everyone is like, oh, I know what that is, hot flashes, night sweats, no sex drive. The ladies are like, yeah, I know what that is. The men are like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know that this was something that would happen to me as I get older, as the normal process of aging. I didn't know this was something that I would expect, and that this is something that actually has treatment. Some of the men, what they really, really complain about is that muscle, the loss of muscle. They just start getting short and fat. You can imagine imagine they get short, fat, and bald.
Yeah.
Someone who for their whole life has had this fantastic, good-looking physique, good-looking muscle, this deep, strong voice, a manly man. So testosterone is really what makes a man a man. Even you see it in animals, like when chickens get that testosterone, these are the cocks that walk around thinking, they are in charge of everything, and they usually end up killed. But anyway, um, this is um, this is a big part of the identity of a man, and they don't realize that decrease in testosterone actually causes a loss of identity, and the man ends up in a place where they subtly, even though they're not very aware, they subtly start to wonder, am I still a man? And so enter the midlife crisis. Now men are trying to, now suddenly there are new children in the family. You've had, say, somebody who's been faithful, loving to his wife for years. Now suddenly, there's a new child from some sort of infidelity, and he doesn't even know what happened. He can't even explain what happened, where this urge just came from to suddenly reproduce again, where they feel like, oh, no, I can't be dying out. I haven't done anything with my life. I have to XYZ. That is actually the hidden danger of andropause. Some of the other things are a bit more subtle, like uncontrolled blood pressure, uncontrolled diabetes. I've already mentioned the stubborn weight loss. So every time you go to the doctor tells you need to lose weight, you're overweight, your blood pressure, you're diabetic, what. And you're doing all the right things, and the weight is just stuck and stubborn. It can even affect your heart. So it increases the risk of heart attacks. It increases the risk of strokes. It is actually quite a big hidden medical risk factor for men, especially because men are generally not so open and aware surrounding their health issues.
With every medical condition, especially one that is new to the ear, there are certain myths that need to be debunked. Do you have any that you could share with us that most people need to be aware of?
I think I've said a couple already. I'm just going to put them under a nice single blanket. Number one, the biggest myth that people have is that this is just a midlife crisis, this is just an emotional thing, and you sort of just need to get over it. It's not, actually. It's a physical, a physiological, a biological reaction. And there's no just get over it. It's something that needs to be grown into, very similar to the puberty thing, where this surge in testosterone causes men to start acting differently. Even later, the decline causes them to start acting differently, and it's something that they do need to grow into. Number two is that people think it only affects sex drive, and that's the biggest problem. That's one of the biggest problems. Men can take that differently. I've seen my patients can take that very differently. Some men are very disturbed by this loss of sex drive. It depends on where they are sexually in their lives. So if they are matching with the missus, their loss of sex drive is matching with the missus's loss of sex drive, they sort of tend to handle it a bit better. But if you find that somebody is trying, say, to start another family, or they've just gotten remarried to somebody who's much younger, or they're not married at all and they're trying to spark up relationships again, that's what they will notice. But the other things are the fat, the gain in fat, the loss of height, the loss of hair, the gain in breasts, like the chest is not as muscular and well defined. The loss in height, they actually get shorter. So you'll notice that the Mr. and the Mrs., suddenly the Mr. is getting a little bit shorter when they're standing in the mirror. Even the strength, like physically the strength that the man has is not there. So things, for example, that he could lift before, he can't lift anymore. That's a normal process of aging. It's not just sex drive that is affected. Mood swings are a lot more common than you think. So you'll find it can be a very charming scene. You see this old couple, They've been together for years, and they're sitting there. They're just having this spicy fight. Yeah, well, you look very old. Yeah, well, you didn't wash the dishes. It's the mood swings. It's the hormones. So you think, okay, it's just the woman who's having the mood swings in this relationship. It's not. It's the man as well. And the combination of these two with their mood swings and their hormones. And you can imagine if a man's andropause is timed with his children going through puberty, it just creates chaos in the house. Suddenly, everybody is moody in the house for no reason that they can identify. And it's all hormonal. Another big myth, people think that it does not happen.
Dr. Jane, we're going to leave it there for now. We officially hit the 3:00 mark, which means we need to get out of here. Thank you so much for the conversation and helping us understand andropause.
Thank you so much for the invite, Pretty, and good night to everybody and our listeners.
Dr. Jane Samuga giving us a detailed understanding of what andropause is. So the next time you want to say to your partner, wazenzingane umdala kangaka, you might want to rethink that statement. Officially 3:00. It's time for me and the team to get out of here. It has been great engaging with you and sharing some of our views and thoughts, as well as your voice being part of the show. We thank you very much for being an integral part of the show. A huge thank you goes out to the producer of the show, and that's Hendrika, as well as the technical producer, Osbu, in studio. Have yourself a fantastic Wednesday. Gwenna is coming up next.